This is clickbait because I don't actually have any of the books physically here with me. Hello, welcome. My name is Gabriel, and today I'm going to be talking about all the very best books I read in 2020. I thought I would spruce up my background a little bit. Do you like this? The best album. Also, the lighting is much better if you haven't noticed because I got a ring light for Christmas. I feel like a real influencer. So, I think we can all agree that 2020 as a whole was not the best. This has not been a really great year on a lot of fronts. But as far as reading goes, I read a ton of really good books. As of right now, I have read 55 books this year, and I think it's going to stay right there. And there are a ton of books that I read this year and loved that didn't quite make the cut for the top 10. Without further ado, here are the very best of the best, the cream of the crop. There's not an exact order to these because I loved all of them, but they are in generally ascending order, and the last 5 are where we get into like favorites of all time territory. But coming in at number 10, we have War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Yeah, that's right, I read War and Peace this year. The very first day of quarantine, I knew I was going to have just a ton of free time, and so I wanted to read the longest book that I owned, and that was War and Peace. Specifically the Anthony Briggs translation. So, for those of you who are unaware, War and Peace follows several aristocratic Russian families throughout the Napoleonic Wars. I read this in some sort of fugue state all the way back in March. Basically, my routine was I would wake up in the morning, read War and Peace all day, and then go to sleep at night. And that still took me 3 entire weeks. But by now, a lot of the details of this book are pretty fuzzy in my brain. You know, I'm not sure I could keep track of all of the characters or name like every single subplot, but I honestly don't think I could have even done that immediately after I finished it. But I'm including it on this list, number 1, because I want to remind the world that I read War and Peace, but number 2, because for the entire time that I was reading it, this book was my entire world. It truly feels like you have lived an entire lifetime within those 1,100 pages. I also remember that while I was reading this, certain passages would be just so beautiful that I would stop and read them over and over again for like 30 minutes at a time. So while I finished it and I'm still having trouble processing a lot of it, I still think that it lives up to the hype absolutely, and I don't think that you can get everything that you need to from it after just one read. And that is why I am planning on doing a reread sometime in 2021. So comment down below if you would be interested in reading War and Peace with me. Then we have number 9, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. This is a science fiction book about 2 women working as spies on opposite sides of a time war who fall in love by reading the letters that they leave for one another across time and space. This is one of the coolest concepts in a book I have ever seen, and it was executed just flawlessly. It is gorgeous. The book is written with this really lush, lyrical style that makes the exciting sci-fi plot feel like a poem. It was just gorgeous, and it made the romance so much more potent. And it was so cool to see these fantastical science fiction elements incorporated into such an experimental, poetic piece of writing. This book really had everything. It had excellent writing, time travel, humor, and romance. If you are on the fence about it, I urge you to give it a chance because it is full of surprises, and I love it more and more every time I think about it. Then, number 8, we have Axios End by Lindsay Ellis. More sci-fi, I know, it's a surprise to me too, but this year, 2 of the science fiction books that I read made it onto my favorites list, so I think it is a genre I need to explore more of in 2021. So, this book is about a young woman who, through her relationship with her fugitive conspiracy theorist father, finds herself entangled in the government cover-up of alien life on Earth. And she also forms a bond with one of the aliens, making her the primary source of communication between our species. This book is full of really interesting political and pop culture references, and it also has some super interesting discussions about linguistics and the limitations of translation. But overall, this book was just pure fun. I don't know if you can tell, but I am kind of an unbearably pretentious person, and I don't usually let myself have fun, especially not while reading. My book of choice typically leans sadder, more realistic, heavier fare, War and Peace. But I thought that this book was just a blast, and it reminded me of movies that I loved when I was younger and TV shows and stuff. So I cannot wait to read this book again and continue on with the series because it seems like it is going to be just a wild adventure. At number 7, I read If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. This book is about a young woman named Tish who finds out that she is pregnant shortly after her boyfriend Fonnie is jailed for a crime that he did not commit. It follows the couple's love stories as well as their families' relationships to one another and their involvement within their community, plus Fonnie's legal defense. I absolutely devoured this book in just a couple of nights, like months ago. So many of the intricate details have lost me by now, but I was just swept away by the stunning and effortless writing. This is the second book by James Baldwin that I read this year, and I cannot wait to read all of his other works. For number 6, I chose Citizen by Claudia Rankine. Some poetry. Well, sort of. This book is a collection of poetic essays focusing on Rankine's experiences living as a Black woman in America. The entire book is written in the second person, meaning that all of the events that she is describing are described as happening to you. It is really unique, and it gives the book this immediacy and an urgency, and it makes a lot of these issues, which a lot of people only see as abstract concepts in the news, really personal. It shows the reader firsthand all of the sorrow and pain and anger that comes with modern racial injustice. It is harrowing, but also hopeful, and I think that it should be required reading for everyone living in America today. For number 5, I chose Cersei by Madeline Miller. No surprise here, I read both of Madeline Miller's books this year and absolutely loved them. She has quickly become one of my all-time favorite authors, and I will read everything she publishes for the rest of my life. This book follows Cersei, the witch goddess from the Odyssey, who is known for turning Odysseus's men into pigs. It tells her side of the story and fills in the gaps in the ancient myths to tell her life story and how she became the way that she is. I loved The Song of Achilles as well, but I chose this book to go in my top 10 because I felt like overall it was more polished and more refined. I think that she is finding a really excellent writing style the more that she continues to write and hone her craft. This book is just stunning. Madeline Miller's writing is just so clear and exciting, but every now and again you will be reading and clipping along and she will just hit you with this gorgeous lyrical line, and it floored me every time. She also invented brand new stories which felt as powerful as all of the original ancient myths. This is a book that I recommend to absolutely everyone, especially people who don't read as often, because I think that it is so accessible and exciting, and you finish it and you are just desperate for more. Then, for number 4, I chose The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So, this book is about a young man who has recently transferred to a tiny liberal arts college in rural Vermont. There he joins an elite classics program, and he and his peers in this program commit a murder. I loved this book, of course, because of the rich atmosphere. You know, dark academia was kind of the subgenre of the year here on BookTube, and I think for good reason. The aesthetics of this book are just immaculate, you know, with the foggy New England town and the dark, dusty libraries. But aesthetics aren't everything with this book, and I think a lot of people get so caught up in the dark academia elements that they forget that at its heart, this is a book about, like, sex, drugs, and murder. It's one of the most exciting stories I've ever read. I honestly could not put it down from the second I opened it. And the aesthetics are just a really cool backdrop for just an insane thriller. So don't be turned off by this book if you're worried that it will be too academic or literary, because it is not as deep as a lot of people make it out to be. Not to say that it isn't, like, deep, like, it's really brilliant writing, it's excellently crafted. I loved this book so much that the second I finished it, I immediately labeled it as my favorite book of all time. And, you know, it probably would still be up there if I hadn't immediately after read, like, 2 more books that I loved even more. Okay, so the top 3 are the real winners of this year. They not only, like, shine above the rest of the 55 books that I read this year, but they all have solid places on my favorites of all time list. Choosing an order for these 3 especially was so difficult for me because they all mean very different things to me, but they are all absolutely incredible. So, coming in at number 3, we have The Odyssey by Homer, translated by Emily Wilson. And this was actually the very first book that I read this year. I picked it up last January because I got a Barnes & Noble gift card for Christmas, and I went straight there and bought this. And if you talked to me at any point, like last January all the way through April, there is a 90% chance that I found a way to bring this book up in that conversation because it was the only thing I wanted to think about or to talk about. This is the only translation of the Odyssey that I have read, but I picked it up because I was going on a bit of a Greek deep dive last winter, and I absolutely adored the story itself. You know, there's a reason that it has stuck around for thousands of years. It is still so gripping and fresh. And Wilson's translation helped to bring out all of the action and emotion at the heart of the story. Her writing is clear and accessible, but it maintains all of the beauty and the poetry of the original. I think it is an excellent introduction to this story, but it is also, from what I've heard and from passages from other translations that I have compared it to, I think that this is the definitive translation, and a lot of people seem to be in agreement with me. Of course, I need to read some other translations before I can be trusted as an authority on it. I know a lot of people this year who wanted to read the Odyssey, and every time they asked me about it, I told them to read this translation because it is not only one of my favorite poems or one of my favorite pieces of ancient Greek translation, it is one of my favorite books of all time. And what really stands out to me about this book, though, isn't necessarily the Odyssey itself, but her incredible 100-page introduction and translator's note, because in there she details her entire process for translating this book and her reasoning behind a lot of word choices. She talks about her decision to match the number of lines exactly to the ancient Greek and her decision to use iambic pentameter over didactic hexameter. Is that right? And she talks about her reasoning behind the blunt depiction of ancient Greek slavery, as well as her mission to eradicate modern forms of misogyny that male translators have projected onto the text, so that instead she can bring out all of the extremely different but equally troubling misogyny that was present in the original text. It is absolutely fascinating, and it spawned my kind of year-long obsession with the art of translation and linguistics. And I blame this book and Axios End for making me sign up for a linguistics class next semester. We'll see how that goes for me, if that just nips my interest for these subjects right in the bud. I'm being really rough on my voice today. Then, for number 2, I have chosen A Mercy by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison really was the author who defined this year for me. I read 7 books by her, and any one of them deserves a place on this list. I now consider her to be my favorite author of all time, which you probably know if you have watched any of my videos, because I usually find a way to sneak a mention of her in there, even if I haven't read one of her books that week. But A Mercy is the one that shines above the rest, because what she accomplishes in just this tiny little book is astonishing. A Mercy follows a young black girl named Florence, who is on a mission to find the blacksmith and healer who can treat a cholera outbreak on the plantation where she is enslaved. The book is set in early colonial Virginia, and it takes place on a plantation where there are white indentured servants, and there is an enslaved Native American woman alongside Florence. And Toni Morrison said it at this time with these characters because she wanted to identify a moment in American history before race and slavery had become synonymous. And she wanted to identify the turning point for where racism became institutionalized and inseparable from the America that we know today. She wanted to give us a momentary glimpse of what the future could have been, and then hammer the nail into the coffin to seal our country's fate. So that alone is an incredible accomplishment. But this book is also one of the most masterfully crafted pieces of writing that I have ever come across, and probably ever will. What Morrison does with atmosphere and with structure is just unparalleled. And this story is told in a way where every single page unlocks some new piece in this puzzle. I can't even find the right analogy for it, but I think that the best way to describe reading this book is that it is like watching, a painter paint a masterpiece, where every brushstroke gives you some clue for what the final piece is going to be, but it isn't until that final stroke where it all comes together. And You read the last page of this book and a lot of separate threads have been buzzing in your mind, and then you get to the last sentence and it feels like the entire universe clicks into place. I have bullied like 7 people into reading this book this year, and it is still not enough. This book makes me want to become an English teacher so that I can force other people to read it, because you just do not understand the full potential of the written word or of the English language until you have read Toni Morrison and until you have read A Mercy. So I know what you're thinking, what could possibly top that? And with this final book, I'm not sure that it necessarily tops A Mercy, but I do think that it hit me a lot more personally and that it means more to me. This next and final book has earned kind of a permanent place in my heart. For number 1, I have chosen A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Oh boy. So, A Little Life follows 4 college friends throughout their postgraduate life in New York City. It explores their careers and their relationships, particularly focusing on one man, Jude St. Francis, and discovering how his traumatic childhood shapes his adult life. This book is about 800 pages, and oh my god, it hurts. This book is so sad that I don't necessarily feel comfortable recommending it to people because I don't want to inflict that kind of pain upon them. So when I tell anybody how much I love this book, I'm very conscious of stressing the fact that you need to be in a place where you think that you can handle it. By the time that I'd finished this book, I couldn't even decide if I liked it because so many things that had happened were just so traumatic. But I consider it a favorite, and I have given it this spot on this list because it had such a profound effect over me. And I think that only an excellent book could affect me that much. A lot of people say that the sadness of this book makes it kind of emotionally manipulative, and while I'm sure there is some truth to that, I also think that everything that happens in this book happens for a reason, because it is trying to say something really specific about the nature of trauma and how placing limitations on friendship, specifically male friendship, forces people into lives that they feel they cannot escape from. This book makes these characters feel devastatingly real, and you keep reading because no matter how much pain it throws upon you, you desperately need to know if things turn out okay, because you cannot accept an ending where these characters are not safe and happy. And even though the whole time you were reading it, some part of you knows that exactly how things are going to end, you cling to the hope that it gives you. And that is not to say that this book has no moments of light. In fact, I think that it is because it gets so dark that the brief moments of happiness are so joyous. I was much more emotionally affected by the happy scenes than during the sad ones. The biggest thing that I can say about this book is that it feels like something. This year especially, when so many of us were just locked inside for days on end staring at our walls, life could feel extremely boring, or more accurately, it felt numbing. And this book is here to drag you to some emotional extremes. Because when it is sad, it is really sad. And when it is happy, it is like the happiest you have ever felt. This book made me experience the whole range of human emotion. I read this book in 3 days, 7 months ago, and I have thought about it every single day since. And I will probably be thinking about it for the rest of my life. And that is my list. Those are what I consider to be the 10 best books that I read in 2020, and I think it is safe to say I had a very successful reading year. Now I have so many books that I know I want to read and that I am so excited to read, and so I think next year is going to be even better. Or at least it better be. I do want to give some brief goals for 2021. So, my Goodreads reading goal is going to be 52 books. I think that is very reasonable. 1 book a week, even with my college schedule. I think that will be very doable. I also want to get out at least 2 videos a month, although I'm going to be shooting for 1 video a week. And then I also have some personal goals for how many subscribers I want to get to next year and how much I want to grow this channel, but I'll keep that to myself because I don't want to aim too high, publicly at least. And then I'm also thinking that this next year I don't want to rate books on a 5-star scale. I think that the way that I read books has really changed ever since I've started giving books star ratings, because the whole time I'm going through a book, I'm thinking less and less about the characters and the plot and the writing, and more about like this point system I'm keeping in my head, where I read something and I'm like, that boosted this a point and that docked it a point. And so I think for a while I'm going to experiment just reading books, and at the end of them I will say, I liked that, or I didn't, or I thought that was really powerful, and not relying on like easy metrics like star systems, which can be really limiting. And that's everything. I think this is going to be the last video I make in 2020, but don't hold me to that because I still have a few ideas that I'm really excited about, and I hope to get to them pretty soon. So without taking any more of your time, be sure to like and leave a comment down below of what your favorite books of the year were, or what your thoughts are on any of these books that I talked about today. And then if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. See you guys next time. Imagine if it wasn't recording.